So I appreciate you coming and participating.
Yeah, no problem.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about Chainsaw, but also about your time, in the rock music scene in the 60s and your band, the Conqueroo. If you could
Sure.
talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so remind me again what you're doing this for.
Well, I've been working on a project. It's a documentary right now on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the Texas cinema, the film industry, but also the music industry, and they seem to be very related.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Yeah, did you look at that thing we did a few weeks ago?
I did, yeah. You did the cast, the live.
Yeah.
Yeah, I caught that one. Yes. Yeah, it was very enjoyable. It was enjoyable. I liked the commentary.
Cool. Right. So, have you asked me a question, or have I been asking all the questions?
No, I just wanted to know about, I guess, mainly your time in the Conqueroo and the Austin folk scene and what became the psychedelic rock scene. A lot of people say that psychedelic rock started in Texas and you guys inspired the San Francisco bands. Can you tell me?
I think in large part,
Okay.
we did. I mean, there was a lot of cross-pollination that happened. I remember the first time I met Chet Helms, who ended up being our manager in San Francisco and was eventually Janice's manager and ran the Family Dog in San Francisco, a collective that's put on shows. I met him in the what was called the Chuck Wagon. I don't know what it is now, but it was a student lounge slash cafeteria in the Union building over there on Waterloo. And he came in. He lived in San Francisco at the time, but he was originally had Texas roots. So, there was some back and forth there. But yeah, we were instrumental, I think, in many ways in sort of setting the tone of, what shall I call it? Creative expression in music. Back in those days, there was really no original music being played in town. It was all copy stuff, as we called it. And the copy bands were very proliferate. There were lots of them. They were supported by the fraternity scene, which was and is still pretty big. And those kids wanted a certain kind of music, and they wanted what they heard before. So anyway, it sort of forced those of us that were less inclined to sort of do somebody else's work, create our own. And I think that, to a degree, contributed to what became psychedelic music, because that was sort of the period, But yeah, I think it's fair to say that we may not have been the only contributor to that psychedelic scene, certainly in San Francisco, but we were among the first. And Austin was among the first in presenting that.
And it started with folk music originally, though, right?
Well, I mean, that was
taking peyote then?
Yeah, for sure. And that was the get together. That was the nexus, was what was the Thursday night folk sing in the Union on the other end of the building, down near the southern entrance. There was a room that somebody would rent, basically, which meant reserve it. And people would gather there and do, little fledgling attempts at, blues songs and, Appalachian songs and, that kind of scene. And that sort of grew into the formation of bands around that kind of stuff.
were the elevators really the first? And was this at the Chuck Wagon or had it moved to the ghetto?
No, no. Those are all sort of different things. The elevators were never in that scene. They were not a college band. We were a college band. Nobody in the elevators that as far as I know of, went to UT. They weren't part of that deal. They were, well, they weren't. I never saw them until we did our first gig with them at the Doris Miller in '67, I guess it was. And they weren't part of that. Now, the ghetto is just where a lot of us lived. And it was just like there were a lot of in those days. And I don't think any exist anymore. I can't imagine they would. These old World War II era wooden multi-story kind of barracks, what would have been barracks on a military base. And I think a lot of developer types would buy these things, you know, from some military base and haul them to a place and park them and turn them into apartments. And so that what the ghetto was just a cheap place to hang out, cook mescaline if that's what you were doing, get loaded, be goofy, brush roaches out of your hair because, you know, that's what it was. And it was just a hangout, you know. It was an apartment building with about, I think there were like 3 or 4 on the bottom and 3 or 4 on the top, tiny little places. And it was just it was a hangout. And the Chuck Wagon, that was, people in the Chuck Wagon either went to school or didn't go to school. People in the ghetto either lived there or just hung out there. If that gives you any clarity. The elevators were not involved sort of in that folky, you know, scene.
They came later.
Yeah.
But in the ghetto, a lot of the figures in the scene I guess Chet Helms and Janis would have been there. I know Chet and Janis went to San Francisco early on.
Right.
Now about Chet, I do have a question. I've heard that he is the person responsible for bringing LSD to Austin. Do you know if that rumor is correct?
I don't know. I didn't see acid until late '67 or so. And I don't think that's right. But let me turn off this.
It might be a rumor.
Yeah.
But Tommy Hall of the Elevators claims to have gone to UT and says he was an MK Ultra subject, that they gave him LSD as part of a test trial. I don't know about that.
Yeah. And in fairness, you know, I forgot all about Tommy. He was around, but not so much in the Chuck Wagon scene because he was a couple of years older than us. I don't know. Tommy's crazy as shit, so who knows? You know, maybe.
I'm sorry. He was more conservative and right wing. I heard a lot of people didn't really like him at first.
Yeah, he was an oddball. He was an oddball. Hang on, my battery's dying. But you know, whatever.
Now with the Conqueroo, when that started with, I guess Powell St. John was instrumental in getting that as the Conqueroo route. But you guys were an acoustic band and you played a clarinet, right?
Not for very long.
Oh.
Yeah, but I had played clarinet in the music department at UT. So that was my instrument, if you will. But that didn't last very long. By the time we were doing gigs, I was playing bass, and Powell was the titular name. It was called St. John and the Conqueroo, playing off of the John the Conqueror route, you know. What did you ask me something I've forgotten already?
Well, I mean about the clarinet, but when you guys did go electric and you picked up bass, had Powell already left Austin? I know he went to Mexico and later San Francisco.
Right. Well, Powell and I lived together in Mexico, and that was '66 summer or so, 4, 5, 6 months in 66. And then the band stuff started after that, between maybe late 66 and early, by 67, I guess, when we did that first gig with the Elevators at Doris Miller, Powell wasn't in the band then, and we'd been playing at a couple of little clubs. You know, we started with the IL, and then some of the straighter clubs that would hire us, you know, because we weren't doing copy music. There was one on Guadalupe up the street from on Nueces. Yeah, maybe I don't remember, but just south of 19th by a couple of blocks, about 18th or so, called the Saracen. And that was a place where we played a fair amount. And of course, the IL Club on 11th. How did I get there? I don't remember.
Now, a lot of shows were with the Elevators, promoted by Electric Grandmother, right? And there was one show in Houston at the Houston Music Hall that I'm very curious about, where Tommy had Stacy had his bad freak out. You know, he took a bunch of acid and had these, premonitions. Do you know what happened there?
At what place?
It was at the Houston Music Hall. It was in February of 67. And Stacy just had a bad trip and fled, and the Conqueroo jammed at the very end. But that was the last Electric Grandmother show before Lockett Witt and formed the Vulcan Gas Company.
Is that crazy one where we played? It was in Bel Air at both of us were on the same stage playing at the same time.
It was a revolving stage.
Yeah.
That's the one, right?
Believe it or not, they had us both playing at the same time.
Yeah.
Whether Stacy flipped or not, I don't remember, frankly. But it was enough to flip you out, because, you know, imagine two bands playing disparate music at exactly the same time in a big booming circular space. But no, I have no memory of that. We went from there to do a high school gig in some god awful Baytown or somewhere around that time. On that same trip. Yeah, it was after we did the Houston gig. I remember we stayed in a hotel that night, and then we went to Baytown and did the high school gig, and then came back.
Yeah. It was a disaster, I heard, and it made Electric Grandmother split with the Elevators, and Sandy Lockett then went and formed the Vulcan Gas Company after, and you guys were like the house band, essentially.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I didn't realize that transition. You know, have you ever talked to Don in Florence, where he lives? Don Hyde?
No, I haven't. No.
He was really the Electric Grandmother, and well, I'm not sure about that actually, but Don was responsible for the Vulcan, along with Lockett and Houston White. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. You should chase down Don Hyde. He should be pretty easy to find. He lives in Florence, but he remembers better than a lot of us what happened.
Now, with the Vulcan, I guess related to Chainsaw, I've heard that actually the cinematographer for Chainsaw, Daniel Pearl, he worked at Vulcan and he shot videos there. I'm going to ask him, about his involvement there.
I don't remember Daniel being there, but we were pretty, self-focused, navel-gazy, obstreperous teenage types, and if he was there, he wasn't doing music, so it didn't matter to me, kind of thing. But I'm sure Daniel will tell you if he was.
Why did you guys never release an album? Did international artists ever approach you, or like an LP studio?
No, we didn't. We had an offer from Mercury then when we got to San Francisco, but it just kind of fell apart, didn't go anywhere.
So
Either it wasn't a good deal or something. I don't know.
the Conqueroo, when did you guys split up and stop playing exactly?
Pretty much it died when our drummer, who was really the adult in the band, he was 10 years older than all of us, had a family.
Mm.
And we got out there and we played this big free gig in Golden Gate Park where we opened for Santana and Big Brother for Janice and the group. And there was, more people than I'd ever seen at a concert before. But of course it was free, and we didn't make any money. And I think probably within about 2 weeks, he was gone. And that was basically the end of the band as it had left Austin, 2 months before or something. And then we kept on, we found another drummer or two and kept on plugging until we were able to put together little bits and pieces. And we worked in a few places, a couple of clubs in Berkeley, as I remember. And that was about it. So mainly it was a year or so of rehearsal, trying to work in new drummers, which was not easy. And it didn't last very long after we hit there, even though we had, Chet and all of the moxie that he brought to the mix. We did a gig. Yeah, that's right. We played it with Howling Wolf at the Avalon, but I think we just did one gig, and we rehearsed lots. We had a rehearsal space with It's a Beautiful Day and The Dead, and we would rotate the three bands that work throughout the day. The Dead got the night slot, we got the kind of morning slot, and It's a Beautiful Day was the afternoon. And so we were exposed to all this stuff, and we were there in the middle of the action, but there wasn't any work,
Now, I guess we should get to Chainsaw. We're probably running out of
Sure.
time for what I said to this. I know you knew Bob Burns.
Sure.
Is that your connection into Chainsaw?
Absolutely. Yeah, Bob. I think Bob came to me knowing that I had a truck, which I'd bought in Oakland, and knew that the script called for one apparently, and so it was a day's work for me, and so I went and picked up a cattle truck they had rented the night before and pulled up on the set, and it went from there.
Did you know about the film? Did you know about Tobe Hooper, as a director?
Zip.
Yeah.
I knew nothing, knew nobody. Only people that were there when I shot were Ed, Bob, and Toby, and Daniel, and Marilyn. And they all principal shooting had already ended, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And so, yeah.
Now, when it came out, did you get recognized on the street? Did you get any accolades for?
Not that I remember. I didn't really pursue visibility because it was just a truck driving job for me. Mm-hmm. And when it was over, my main interest was, of course, still music. Even though I had the truck, we had reconstituted the Conqueroo back here in Austin, and we're playing, and dive bars, everything from, well, they weren't called dive bars then, but they were, small kind of beer college places. There was one at 24th and Rio Grande, I forget the name of, still there, Abel Moses or something weird. And there was the old, really neat one, the split rail was cool. It was one of these places like you can't imagine would exist. It had, the dance floor was asphalt, because basically what it was in its final incarnation was a sort of drive-in restaurant that got roofed over the drive-in area part and turned into a bar, you know, with the stage at one end and, you know, blah, blah, beer machines at the other end. And it was a cool old place. But what's even cooler about it is it was a stagecoach stop from San Antonio. And that's why it was called the split rail, because it was very, you know, kind of Western and funky. But having an asphalt floor was like the weirdest thing, you know, because it was just a roofed over parking lot almost, you know. Anyway.
You did some compositional stuff. Didn't you score some of Bob Burns's films?
Yeah, yeah. Did one of Bob's films, Mongrel, and some other stuff that slipped my mind here. What have I worked on? That was my primary, you know, raison d'etre, as they say. I'm a composer by training, so I would do that whenever I could trick somebody into paying me, and then built a studio and did that for 25, 30 years at Lone Star Recording down there on Lamar, doing primarily industrial stuff, film scores for, you know, industrial films, and, you know, not a lot of theatrical stuff, you know, jingles, spots, that kind of thing.
Now, I guess to close this before we run out of time, do you recall anything about I know you had a cameo in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Yeah.
Do you remember how you got, you know, involved with that or being in the movie?
No idea. I'll tell you a funny story if you hadn't heard it, which is my manager called me up one day, this is years ago, and he said, "Hey, were you in Chainsaw 2?" And I said, "No, just the one." He said, "Oh, okay." And then about 2 minutes later, I get an email with the screenshot of me in the stupid movie. I had no memory, zero memory. Too many drugs or drink, I don't know, but I had no recollection, man. And I think as best I can reconstruct, Kim found me and thought, you know, like I've done a lot of cameos. That's just sort of the bit, you know, he wanted to have some of the originals in there. And I wasn't known as an actor, so just a smile and, you know, mug opportunity was all that he needed from me.
Now, one last thing, as far as did you stick with psychedelics like Tommy, who's, you know, religious about it? No, you kind of gave him up.
No. I mean, it was of the moment.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously I'd had peyote way before acid, you know, and yeah, I mean, it I had other things to do. Being loaded all the time was not one of them. I had work to do.
Do you have anything you want to plug? I knew you were going to be in a convention this coming year. Is that being rescheduled or?
Yeah, hopefully well, there's the Bastrop one. If I'm actually old enough to qualify for a vaccine, if they're actually going to be putting them out.
Oh, great.
But hopefully, surely I'll have one by the time of Texas Frightmare in Dallas, which is a big show. That's about it, you know.
Yeah. Well, I hope that happens. If it does, I'll try and come out and see you guys.
Yeah, by all means, Yeah. So this project you're working on, is it going to be a book or?
It may turn into a book. Right now, it's a documentary, a fan documentary, basically. But
oh, okay.
It's a work in progress. I'll keep you updated though, and I have an Instagram page where I kind of post my research. You know, I can show you photographs.
I should join Instagram.
Yeah.
I haven't, because I was asking my middle boy. I said, "Man, do I need to, you know, get on Instagram?" He said,
"Yeah, you know, I'll send you this and a YouTube link for my stuff for Chainsaw."
That's cool.
Well, thank you so much, Ed. I really appreciate you doing this.
My pleasure, man. Good luck with what you're working on.
Thanks. Stay safe. Have a
Yeah,
good
yeah. Later.